Yeah.
Let's continue.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Okay, so the next piece of the puzzle is going to be the actions. And we talked about them a little bit already, but basically you can think of, if you think of the objects as the nouns, you can think of the actions as the verbs. And realize that non-players can also have actions. So obviously, you know, the enemies are non-players and they have actions. They will shoot. As this example, door can swing open, etc. Now, there's a little bit of a tricky topic, which a subtle concept, which may or may not be helpful. I read about it and internalized it, and I'll describe it to you, and you'll see it when you get to the reading. But it's the difference between operative actions, what he calls operative actions, and what he calls resultant actions. And an operative action is the minimum actual step that you can take. So an operative action in checkers might be you can move the piece this way or that way, but not, you know, you can move it in certain ways. But the resultant action are all the different reasons or purposes that the player might decide to take that action. So in tic-tac-toe, the available actions, the operative actions are, you can put an X or a 0 in an empty space. But the resultant actions are essentially all the reasons why you might do that. You might do that because you're trying to form a row. You might do that because you're trying to block the other guy from getting a row. In checkers, you can imagine the same thing. There's a lot of different reasons why you might move your piece from point A to point B. And the reason that this distinction is made is that while the operative actions are built into the rules of the game and they cannot be violated, the resultant actions tend to be what players, in playing the game, discover as tactics and strategies for which they can make that move or take that action. And the idea is that as a game designer, you want to be thinking about those resultant actions and encourage them, because the more resultant actions you have, in other words, the more actual gameplay discovers reasons and strategies and tactics to employ those actions. So it's no longer simply a move, it's a blocking move. It's no longer simply a move, it's a move to begin a certain campaign. The richer the game is, and the better a game is. Is that a finger?
Yeah.
So it was a very small one.
That's very small, and
yeah.
I'm tired. So can you think of each action as the transition function in every finite state machine created?
Yes and no. Not every.
Not every?
No, because there's a lot of transitions that have nothing to do with an action that the player has taken. They just happen, time passed or whatever.
Okay.
So actions are things that players can do.
All right. So
Okay.
it has to be specifically induced by.
Again, hand wave, because
Yeah.
there are arguments that say, for example, you may have a thing that acts a lot like a player, but it's not a human. It's a non-player character. You may have an enemy that's acting like a player. But I think the distinction between the two is the micro legalistic sense of what the move is versus the purpose. Yeah.
I don't think I understand the difference, so to speak, between operative actions and resultant actions. Maybe because I think in chess, and there's a lot of moves that like have an overarching strategy.
Right.
But maybe you don't know really what you move. Like if you move the knight into the corner, that's supposed to be bad.
Right, right. Well, so those are strategies. I think that in chess is a good example. I mean, in chess, the operative actions are very clear. I mean, you can specifically enumerate everything you can do. But if you become, or take Go also, which is even more interesting because it's even more,
really hard.
very few moves. I mean, moves are very, very minimal, and yet the game develops a culture and expertise and a style of gameplay that recognizes much more than simply the moves. The moves kind of are there for a purpose. And I think that the point of this, and it's a subtle point, and I admit that I'm not deep enough also to basically be able to say from personal experience, but the intent here is that if you think in your design of your game of resultant actions, tactical reasons why a player might do something, that if there's richness there, you have a rich game. If there isn't richness there, you have a poor game.
Okay, so you're saying if there's a lot of strategic depth, that's what we should encourage.
ability to create that depth.
Right, exactly. The more ways there are for the user, for the players to discover, and it's not just random, it's not like everyone individually, it's really, I mean, if you think about the games you know that people start knowing, and they have even words for these things, a certain way of moving, a certain kind of move to make, which you do with a certain intent, and that becomes part of the culture of the game. And to the extent that your operative actions are sufficiently varied to allow game players and the game itself to encourage a richness of the second level, the better game you've got.
Cool. So it's like the meta game versus the actual game.
Yeah, in a way. And I think it also drives home the point that while from a code point of view, for example, you would be thinking about what are all the legal moves or legal actions that a player can take, from a game dynamics point of view, it's worth thinking to the next level and to observe your players during play testing as to what they're doing, to see whether you can do things in your operative actions to encourage them to think deeper and have a richer experience around developing actions. So it's really a game design thing. Yeah?
Also, if you're making a robot player, the robot player would probably play with the resulting actions, I think.
Right, I mean, that's kind of the strategy. The robot player is not simply picking, presumably the robot player gets in an angry mode, and then in the angry mode he tends to do these moves, he goes at, I mean, even in the maze game, the operative actions are, I can move or I can't. I can step on a token or a piece of gold, or I can't, or I don't. But the operative actions are the strategies. Okay, am I moving randomly? Am I moving to the closest thing that I can measure without regard to the walls? Am I moving to the closest thing with regard to walls? Am I moving to the closest thing which is closer to me than my opponent? Those are all strategies. And so, and actually an operative action in the way Tim designed this thing is this idea that the walls have 25% probability of being broken through. So by adding that operative action, which is the possibility, heuristically or actually randomly, to make it through a wall, he created a whole bunch of resultant actions, because now there's strategies that can take advantage of this. And now suddenly it makes sense to hit against the wall over and over again, and that's the strategy you're pursuing. So that's how adding a little bit of operative action has made the game richer. And that's kind of the idea here. So they talk about emergent gameplay, which is basically gameplay which emphasizes that. Yeah, I said all that. So we can compare Go to chess. And it's interesting. I mean, everybody kind of knows a little bit about Go and a little bit about chess. Chess has, a lot of different pieces with a lot of simple rules, but what's permitted and what's not permitted. And, there's obviously strategies that were built around that. Are you moving the pawn forward 2 steps instead of 1? Yes, you're permitted to do it, but why are you doing it? Are you doing it to attack, or are you doing it to defend? In Go, the moves are even much simpler, and yet there's a huge, obviously, literature about how to use those simple steps to achieve certain goals. And these are not just like overarching strategies applied to one game, they're actually techniques that people write books about and articles about. And that's kind of the idea there. Okay, so to think about your games, here are some questions to ask. So why don't the product teams huddle and have a little discussion about this? What are the actions in my game? Are there any resultant actions that you can already identify? Can you think of any other resultant actions that would be cool? And is there anything you can do to your operative actions to permit those? And how are the actions triggered? These are just discussion, initiators. You don't have to ask to talk about this. But so what I want to do is to go around and hear from each team, what are the actions? Are they operative? Can you think of any resultant ones?